Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at a simple extension that I made to the tool selector. So now when I press a button, I have a nice UI here where we can select the tool that we want to use. For example, say I want to use the sword. Now I have the sword in my hand and I can use it. So let's look at how that's done. So here I have in the player input a couple of things here. On the switch tool input down, here is set up as a thumbstick as well as button 1 and 3. In the switch tools input, on any state of the game, when the input is pressed, that means when the thumbstick or the button is pressed down, the UI here becomes visible. When the button is released, here on up, the UI becomes invisible again. So that's how the UI is brought up and turned off. It makes tool switching very fast. Now let's look at the tool selector UI itself. Here you can see it isolated. In the tool selector UI we have, besides the regular UI elements, we have this tool selector script that is hooked to the right hand controller. This is the controller that enables and disables both the distance grab hand and the fixed hand with the different tools inside. Besides that, it also has a parent transform here, which is on the left hand, that controls where the UI is going to show up. As you saw before, it's floating above my left hand. The UI itself is pretty straightforward. It follows the same design as all the other UIs we've been building so far. It has a regular frame, it has a header, then inside it has a grid layout for the slots. It's using a toggle group to make sure that only one tool is selected at a time, and it allows to switch off because if we select no tool, we want to enable the regular distance grab hand. And then inside we have all the tool slots here that are much like the other slots, a regular toggle, and they have their own tool slot script here, which we'll look into in a minute. But that is generally how it's set up. Pretty simple from a UI standpoint. Let's look at the code. First, let's look at a few setup objects that we have here. We have a tool object that's a scriptable object that's going to contain a couple of things. First is the damager that we've been using before and the tool type. Neither of these are being used right now in this functionality, but at a later stage, I'll integrate them into how the damager works. For example, what we mentioned the last video about making sure that certain tools work better for certain activities, like chopping down trees should be really fast and easy with the axe and should be difficult or impossible with the other tools. Then have the tool type here, which is a simple empty scriptable object that we're using here instead of creating an enum and having to make sure that that enum stays in sync. You can just use scriptable objects and just populate things dynamically using them. Similarly, we have this tool script that basically just serves as a mono behavior to house the scriptable object that we built before. For now, there's no extra functionality attached to this, but we may add something in the future. Then we have the tool slot itself. Similarly, it houses the tool object, the scriptable object here. It also keeps the reference of the toggle in the tool slot, and it has a method to expose whether the toggle is turned on or not. Now in the tool selector, we have a bit more behavior attached to this. We're keeping a reference to the tool switcher that you saw before, so we can switch tools in the right hand, and we have the reference to the parent transform, as you already saw. So we can parent the UI to this transform, and then we have a group of tool slots here. So at the start, we get all the tool slots from the children here, from the UI, and then we parent the UI transform to the parent transform that we selected before, and we reset its position to be at 0 and with no rotation locally. Then we set it to active false so that the UI starts hidden and only comes up when we use the input. We also have this onSelection change method that we're going to look into. This is set up so that it gets called whenever a selection in the UI changes, like when we select a different toggle, and then uses the isSelected method from the tool slot to figure out which slot was selected and then call the tool switcher to enable that tool specifically. And of course, if no slot is selected, by default we enable the regular distance grab hand. You can see here in the slots that we have this onValueChanged boolean, and that is calling the onSelection change. So every slot has the same call, which does mean that the value gets called twice if you select a different tool when you have already one selected, but it doesn't really affect anything in the end. And then finally, we can look here at the tool switcher. Most of the script you've already seen. where we can look at the enable tool method that's using the tool object. This specifically sets the distance grab hand to active false, so that's hidden, and then enables the fixed hand, and then goes through the tools inside of the tool switcher until it finds the tool that has the tool object that was passed. So if we passed in the axe tool, then we will look through all the tools for the axe, and then we set that to active true, and then we also capture that index. Because for now, we're still keeping the ability to cycle through the tools. We'll be looking more into that in a separate video, but for now we're just keeping track of that. And then for all the other tools that do not match the tool that was passed, we just set them to active false, so they're all hidden. And that is it. We can quickly look in VR now that you know how it works, so you can see it in action. So that you know how it works, you can see here, you can select hammer here, quickly switch to the pickaxe, and then quickly go back to holding nothing. And that is it for today. Thank you for sticking out with me. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.